Hello, this is Mr. Weber again, and this is your third video lecture for AP US History. This is The Europeans Create a Global World. Now, this section is possibly the most in-depth one that you've had of your first few video lectures this week, so I want you to pay very close attention, take very good notes, because there is a lot to cover today. This is going to be a little longer than than the first two that you've been exposed to. So we're going to look at four different sections today. The Renaissance changes Europe, West African society and slavery, Europeans explore America, and the Spanish Conquest. So you could see that some of this is going to be review for topics that you looked at in world history your sophomore year. So you're already going to be familiar with a lot of this, but you could tell that there's a lot that goes into this section. Okay, so like I said, take good notes and make sure that you are diligent with your homework questions that you're going to have to post. So let's begin. It starts in Portugal. Portugal, a small and remote European nation that for 50 years had set its sights on the East. It paved the way for contact between the old and the new worlds. The Portuguese pioneered new navigational techniques that were eagerly studied by the young Christopher Columbus, who lived in Portugal from 1476 to 1485. Columbus was looking for a quick route to the east when he encountered an unknown American landmass in 1492. The Atlantic Ocean, long a barrier to Europeans, became a highway to this brand new world. Quickly, Portugal and Spain began Europeanizing the globe, and they divided the new lands between them. In 1498, Vasco da Gama landed on the Malabar coast of India. He established an Asian empire of trade and commerce that was backed by power, war, and plunder. Spain established sugar plantations in the Caribbean that soon were worked by African slaves. Hernán Cortés conquered the Aztecs in Mexico. Francisco Pizarro conquered the Incas in Peru. So you could tell that the Spanish were very active in the New World, and they were very eager to seek out their riches and to grow their empire. And you should be well familiar with their slogan, God, gold, and glory. And that is what they were after indeed. So let's take a look then at our very first section, which is the Renaissance changes Europe. Stimulated by the wealth and learning of the Arab and the Chinese world, and of the reintroduction of Greek and Roman texts following the Black Death that destroyed 1/3 of the population, Europe experienced a rebirth of learning, economic development, and cultural life. The Renaissance had the most impact, however, on the upper classes. A new ruling class of moneyed elite, merchants, bankers, and textile manufacturers, created a concept of civic humanism. This ideology celebrated public virtue and service to the state and would profoundly influence European and American conceptions of things like government and national expansion. In Italy, this movement led to the establishment of city-states as republics without princes or kings. Works by artists such as Michelangelo, Palladio, and Da Vinci were part of a flowering of artistic genius that set standards that still influence the modern era. Following Niccolo Machiavelli's advice in The Prince from 1513, an alliance of monarchs, merchants, and royal bureaucrats challenged the power of the agrarian nobility by creating royal law courts and bureaucracies. Monarchs allowed merchants to trade throughout their realms, granted privileges to the artisan organizations called guilds, and they also safeguarded these commercial transactions, thereby encouraging domestic manufacturing and foreign trade. In return, kings and princes extracted taxes from towns and loans from merchants to support their armies and their officials. This mutually enriching alliance of monarchs, merchants, and royal bureaucrats, which eventually became known as mercantilism, which will be a very important term for you, propelled Europe into its first age of overseas expansion, again under Spain and Portugal. Because Arabs and Italians dominated trade in the Mediterranean, a man named Prince Henry of Portugal sought an alternate oceanic route to Asia. Under Henry's direction, Portugal led European expansion overseas. Arab learning and innovations in sail and ship design facilitated Henry's success. Eventually, Henry's mariners sailed far into the Atlantic, where they discovered and colonized the Azores and the Madeira Islands, and from there they explored the sub-Saharan African coast. Now this brings us to our next section, which is West African slavery and society. Vast and diverse, West Africa stretches along the coast from present-day Senegal to the Democratic Republic of the Congo. In the 1400s, tropical rainforest covered much of the coast, but a series of great rivers, the Senegal, the Gambia, the Volta, the Niger, and the Congo, provided access to the interior, where most people lived. There were few coastal cities because there was very little seaborne trade. Most West Africans farmed small plots and lived with extended families in small villages that specialized in certain crops, which ranged from millet and cotton to livestock, yams, and oil-rich palm nuts. They traded both raw and manufactured goods with one another, including rare items such as salt, iron, gold, textiles, and ivory. The majority of the population lived in hierarchical societies ruled by princes, similar to the Aztecs and the Maya people in Mesoamerica. Some Africans inhabited smaller-scale stateless societies based on household and lineage. Among West Atlantic speakers, the Fulani and Wolof peoples were the most numerous. Mande speakers in the upper Niger region included the Malinke and Bambara peoples. The Yorubas and the Igbos of southern Nigeria spoke varieties of the Kwa language. Finally, the Mossis and other Voltaic speakers inhabited the area along the upper Volta River. Spiritual beliefs varied greatly among these peoples, with most West Africans recognizing a variety of deities. West Africans who lived immediately south of the Sahara, the Fulanis in Senegal, and Mande speakers in Mali, and the Hausas in northern Nigeria, learned about Islam from Arab merchants and missionaries, and Islam remains prevalent in that region to this day. At first, European traders had a positive impact on West African peoples also by introducing new plants, coconuts and lemons, new animals like pigs, and metal products like iron, and they also expanded these African trade networks. From small fortified trading posts along the coast, Europeans shipped metal products, manufactures, and slaves along the coast and also to inland regions. In return, they took gold, ivory, and pepper. In 1502, Vasco da Gama's ships outgunned Arab fleets, and the Portuguese government soon built fortified trading posts on the coast and opened trade routes from Africa all the way to Indonesia and up the coast of Asia to China and Japan. Portuguese traders joined African states and Arab merchants in this slave trade. Now, bonded labor, slavery, serfdom, and indentured servitude was the norm in most pre-modern societies, and in Africa, this generally took the form of slavery. A small portion of West Africans were trade slaves, mostly war captives and criminals sold from one kingdom to another as agricultural workers. Some African slaves were carried over land in caravans by Arab traders all the way to the Mediterranean region. To exploit this trade, the Portuguese merchants established these forts that we've been talking about in small port cities. First at a place called Almeida in 1482, and later at Gore and Pinda and Loango, where they bought gold and slaves. And they bought these typically from African princes and warlords. Now, initially, they carried a few thousand African slaves each year to work on sugar plantations in the Cape Verde Islands and the Azores and the Madeira Islands. They also sold slaves all the way up to Lisbon, which soon had a black population of about 9,000. After 1550, Other Europeans soon joined West Africa's long-established trade in humans. By 1700, Europeans shipped hundreds of thousands of slaves to new American sugar plantations in Brazil and the West Indies. So this brings us to our next section, which is Europeans explore America. Explorers financed by the Spanish monarchs, King Ferdinand of Aragon and Queen Isabella of Castile, discovered the Western Hemisphere for Europeans. Married in an arranged match to combine their Christian kingdoms, the young rulers completed what was known as the centuries-long Reconquista. In 1492, their armies captured Granada, which was the last Islamic state in Western Europe. Simultaneously, Ferdinand and Isabel sought trade and empire, and they enlisted the services of a man named Christopher Columbus, who was a Christian mariner from Genoa. Misinterpreting the findings of Italian geographers, Columbus believed that the Atlantic Ocean, which was long feared by Arab merchants as this 10,000-mile wide green sea of darkness, he thought it was a much narrower channel of water which separated Europe from Asia. Although dubious about Columbus's theory, Ferdinand and Isabel arranged financial backing from Spanish merchants, and they charged Columbus with finding a western route to Asia and to carry Christianity to its people. Christopher Columbus then set sail with 3 small ships in August of 1492. After a perilous voyage of about 3,000 miles, he disembarked on October 12th on an island in the present-day Bahamas, believing he had indeed reached Asia, the Indies, and he believed this to his dying day. He never knew he was in America, a new continent. Columbus called the natives that he met, which were the Taino, the Arawak, and the Carib Indians, he called them Indians, and he called the islands the West Indies. Although Columbus found no gold, the monarchs sent 3 more expeditions over the next 12 years. They wanted to make the new land that they called Las Indias, the Indies, into their brand new Spanish Empire. During those expeditions, Columbus began the colonization of the West Indies, transporting more than 1,000 Spanish settlers, all men, and hundreds of domestic animals. A German geographer soon labeled this new continent America in honor of a Genoese explorer named Amerigo Vespucci. Now, Vespucci had explored the region around 1500, and he believed that the land was not Asia, and he called it a Nuevo Mundo, a new world. The Spanish didn't believe him, and the Spanish disregarded his term, and they continued to consider all these lands part of the Indies and subsequently part of their empire. So this brings us to the very next section, our last section, which is the Spanish conquest of these lands. Now, Spanish adventurers ruled the people of the Indies with an iron hand. After subduing the Arawaks and the Tainos on Hispaniola, the Spanish probed the mainland for gold and slaves. Rumors of rich Indian kingdoms in the interior encouraged other Spaniards, including hardened veterans of the Reconquista, to launch an invasion. In 1519, Hernán Cortés, a member of the Spanish gentry class, and his fellow Spanish conquistadors landed on the Mexican coast, and they began a conquest of the Aztec Empire, which we talked about in the first lecture. Luck, Indian allies, and superb negotiation strategies enabled the Spanish to emerge victorious. Moctezuma, the Aztec ruler, believed that Cortés might have been a returning god and allowed him to enter the empire without any challenge whatsoever. Superior military technology, internal divisions within the Aztec Empire, and the assistance of a female native interpreter named Malinali, or Malinche, also contributed to Spanish victory. The Spanish also had a silent ally, which was disease. A smallpox outbreak of 70 days went on to completely decimate the population of Tenochtitlan, the capital city of the Aztecs, and this enabled Cortés and his crew to infiltrate the city. Subsequent outbreaks of measles, influenza, and smallpox facilitated the collapse of the Aztecs. In the 1520s, the Spanish conquest entered a brand new phase when Francisco Pizarro overthrew the Inca Empire in Peru. The Incas were also easy prey for the Spanish because of internal fighting over their throne and, again, the disease which was brought by the Spanish. The Spanish invasion changed life forever in the Americas. Disease and warfare wiped out virtually all of the Indians of Hispaniola. At least 300,000 people perished. The conquistadors remained powerful because they held royal grants, which were called encomiendas, giving them legal control of the native population, principally on plantations and livestock ranches that exported goods to Europe. So these conquistadors had rights given to them by their king to do whatever they wanted to these natives. The Spanish invasion had a significant impact also on life in Europe, as well as the Americas and in Africa, due to a process of transfer known as the Columbian Exchange. The gold and silver that formerly honored Aztec gods now gilded the Catholic churches of Europe and flowed through the counting houses of Spain, making that nation the richest and most powerful in Europe. Between 1500 and 1650, no fewer than 350,000 Spaniards migrated to Mesoamerica and western South America. More than 75% of the Spanish settlers were men, and many of them took Indian women as their wives and mistresses. Consequently, a substantial mixed-race population called mestizos quickly appeared, along with an elaborate race-based caste system. The empire contained about 16 million people, a dominant caste of 3.2 million Spaniards, 5.5 million people of mixed Indian and European heritage, and about 1 million African slaves, not to mention the 6.5 million Indians who were forced to live mostly on marginal lands. This does finally conclude video lecture number 3. Make sure that you address the review questions that you see at the bottom of the page. You have a lot of questions to answer on the historical evidence form, so make sure that you take care of that. Read the section before you do so, and thank you very much.